It's kind of hard for me to imagine a show that would be more obviously aimed at someone like me than HBO's Euphoria, given that I am a trans woman and a drug addict. And that's the two main characters. A large part of my enjoyment of this show just comes from the fact that being bisexual, largely attracted to androgyny, and also looking up to trans women who are really able to, pull it off extremely well, like Hunter Schafer. It's very easy for me to look at this couple. Zendaya in genderless clothing and Hunter Schafer being just unfathomably beautiful. The two of them together, it's hard not to look at. But beyond that, I think Euphoria is a pretty good show. It's very well directed. It makes me feel like I need to be on a lot more drugs than I was when I was actually watching it. Don't do drugs, kids. Don't do fentanyl or heroin. I don't care if you do anything else. In moderation, which means less than I smoke weed. What intrigued me the most about this show, though, was how focused it is on psychology, on diving into the backstories of the characters and trying to examine why they think and feel the things that they think and feel. When I was growing up, culturally, people were just sort of seen as being the way they are just inherently. Just are what you are. There wasn't a lot of broad cultural understanding of psychology. When I was growing up, people didn't know stuff about psychology in general. I developed an interest in psychology in my teens for reasons that should be obvious. I got heavily into media which explores psychology, and even still, there was very little of it that ever did so in explicit terms. Like, Neon Genesis Evangelion is very famous for being heavily inspired by especially Jungian psychology, for making explicit reference to certain ideas like the hedgehog's dilemma or the ego, superego, and the id. But even that is like very light compared to modern shows that will outright diagnose the main characters, like tell us that they have ADHD or that they've been through the system in this or that way. And I think part of that is possible now because we all have more of a comfortable realization of the limitations of psychology. When I was growing up, there was a period where I thought that everybody should have a state-appointed therapist. I thought it was so important that we understand people psychologically. Now I've come to realize that we just don't know that much about why people think and feel the way they do, and a lot of our attempts to control the way that people are, even, just to help them with therapy and psychology, has been a lot more manipulative and a lot less couched in outright science and a lot more couched in theory and experimentation than I would like. I actually have a lot of problems with the way that modern therapy is handled. I like that it's something that so many more people are thinking about. I like that when I get on TikTok, it's a whole lot of people basically talking about, their symptoms of their whatever, mental thing that they've got and trying to work through it, trying to sort of spread awareness, spread connectivity, spread a feeling of definition for why you are this way. And as long as you don't let yourself get swallowed in a victimhood mindset of like, because I have this thing, I now can't be normal. Like, rather what you should be realizing is no one is normal. We've got this idea now of neurodivergent, but neurodivergent is a weird term because it supposes that there is a normalcy, like a circle around which you can draw, oh, the most people fall into this category. And I think there's maybe at best like 20% of the population that is similar enough that like any one thing could appeal to them, but people just so super overestimate. They think it's like 80% of everyone is one way and then 20% are different, when it's really like 20% are one way and 80% of people are nothing like each other at all. Broadly, you can sort of categorize people by, tendencies and trends in actions, but no two people are going to actualize those things exactly the same way. And so even though you could, broadly say something like, oh, I have ADHD, my husband Bird also has ADHD, manifests very differently, and it's not the only thing about either of us, and I really do think that we should be looking at psychology as not just a spectrum the same way that we look at like autism as a spectrum, but like everything is a spectrum. Every part of your brain is a spectrum from one wavelength to another, and everyone's brain's shaped a little bit different. So the broad categorizations we use are just to help us understand that there are major differences between us, but I think we are all way more similar in that there are so many strange things about us than people realize. I really don't think there's somebody that you can't diagnose with anything, you know? Like, it just doesn't... I've never met that person. I've never met a person that I didn't think was a little out of whack. But of course, if you are able to function within society to your own satisfaction, then you probably won't look at yourself that harshly or see yourself as like, oh, well, I'm neurodivergent. You're just like, oh, I'm just a little weird, you know? But like, actually everyone's a little weird, and how far you push that or focus on it, or, you know, how much you can't understand how to hide it or how other people are suppressing their own weirdness. I personally have reached a point in my life where I am much less interested in psychologically examining myself or, you know, looking at people through terms of their psychology than I ever have been before. Maybe just because it's gotten normalized to a point now where I don't feel like I'm fighting this battle to get people to recognize that, like, you act how you act for a reason. I think the fact that modern media has gotten so focused on character development and on showing evolution and on continuous narratives as opposed to, you know, bite-sized pieces of narrative, people now just have a better understanding of, like, yeah, people grow, people change, and we've seen it, we've experienced it through storytelling to an extent where now it's being reproduced into the storytelling, that it is an ideal characteristic thereof, you know? Where something like Mushoku Tensei, if I had to say what I think the biggest influence of that story is, it's how much it understands psychology. It's that the reason the main character is reborn from birth is that the author is saying this character became the person that they were because of everything that had happened in their past up to when they died. And so for them to be someone different, they have to have a different past. And so we have to watch the evolution of that person going through this new life and also see how still having that psychology of the person they were before affects even how this new life will come about. And I think that focus on self-examination meets a lot of the people who are consuming lots of media in an attempt to understand themselves right where they're at. These people who are maybe struggling to fit into society and are re-examining their own history, trying to figure out, where did I go wrong? What could I have done different? That's exactly who this type of show is going to appeal to. And so it spawns, you know, different people comparing it to their own situation, their own upbringing, their own idealized version of what their life could have been, and recreating those stories with this tight focus on psychology and character development and growth. It's fascinating to me because I can remember a time when writer advice would be, start your story where the main character starts his legend. Like, you have to start with something really awesome happening, something that the reader will be blown away that this event occurred, and then that's what intrigues them to follow the character forward, is that this character has accomplished some kind of feat. And I suppose in the case of the Rebirth Isekai, you could say that the feat is usually the heroic sacrifice at the start of the story that gets them reborn. But I end up feeling like actually we're just watching the natural growth of a person whom we're meant to be interested in simply because they are a human being or are relatable to us in some kind of personal way, and then to watch them grow into someone who can accomplish something interesting much later in the story. And it's just shocking to me how long stories are now allowed to go before proving the main character impressive. That the point of it is to show how they became impressive, which ordinarily I think historically people just would have assumed they just must have had an interesting backstory, and then at some point you might get to learn it, maybe you don't, whatever, but the point was never the backstory in and of itself. It was never that we led all the way up to that point. But I think that kind of self-examination is just really culturally relevant right now. I think that's why Rebirth Isekai has taken off so much. I think it's why shows like Euphoria are so fixated on the backstory, telling a character's backstory in every single episode, and really trying to lead us into the current moment before we go forward through the rest of the story. I like this. I like this change. I think that Euphoria handles it less clumsily than a lot of these isekai anime do by doing its whole backstory of one character in like 10 minutes and then being at the present and then going back and doing backstories each episode for different characters, leading us to the present again and again, so that it never feels like this long drag to figure out what is the point or what, you know, who are these people. But at the same time, we get these really interesting psychological explorations of each character along the way. I really like that, and I hope that more series will adopt similar structures, maybe not exactly copying what Euphoria did. I am fascinated by this modern culture of obsession with psychology, and I really hope that it leads to more and more people just casually understanding and having conversations about psychology that will bring us to a next level of understanding on the whole of humanity, where people are able to share their feelings more easily because they have more words for it, more expectations that other people will feel similarly, more realization that no one is really totally alone in the weirdness of how their brain works, even if it's not exactly the same as anybody else. It's equally important that you understand that other people are similar to you and that you're not anybody else. Those two things are both equally important for you to realize, and I think psychology is still a long way from really instilling that sense in people, but I hope we get there. And let me know what you think about this modern psychological revolution we're going through, where I really believe the Zoomer generation is the first generation that's going to come up with just like an innate knowledge of the DSM and all of its diagnoses. You can find more of my writing on goldenwitch.substack.com. You can support me on patreon.com/goldenwitchfire. You can hear me on other podcasts like the Hip Hop Review Show, the Jittery Zeitgeist, and the new Void Gazers podcast, which are both on the ASE Presents channel, linked in the description. I also show up in some of their Patreon bonus content, and we do all kinds of fun stuff together. So check out all the content that I make with them, all the other stuff I do, linked in the description and all over the channel. And thanks again for watching, and never forget, anime forever.